Hi Survivor fans, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be ranking the Survivor 47 cast based on how they played on this season. I'm going to look at social game, strategic game, win equity, really all of the above when it comes to someone's Survivor game. And keep in mind, obviously, this is just my opinion. It's a subjective list, even though trying to be objective, there is a level of objectivity to making a ranking like this, but everyone is going to come out of a season with differing opinions. I've seen some opinions online, and mine, I think, agree and disagree with the overall sentiment, but I've seen a lot of people disagreeing on different things as well. So if you want to leave your opinions in the comments below, please feel free, because this has been a very interesting season, and I feel like kind of a divisive one, but here I'm going to give my take on it. At number 18, I do have TK as the worst player this season. I think it's pretty clear, based off of the early boots, that TK really fumbled the most and did the most wrong. He was the best challenge player on his tribe, and in the pre-merge, very early on at least, you would think that he would stay in the game. But he just was a bit too abrasive and controlling over some people, and though it was kind of a mistake, he did piss off Tiana, and then she wasn't loyal to him, and Kyle kept him, so that's a good thing, but he was the only person that wanted to keep him around. So I don't think he's one of the worst players ever, but he definitely screwed up, and that puts him at number 18. And at number 17, I did decide to go with Rome, despite the fact that he made it all the way to the Mergatory round. 13th place, I have him here at 17. The reason being, despite him doing a few things right, maybe, like getting close with Genevieve, who happened to be one of the better players on the season, and I think it was good that he took the one-day idol after seeing that Teeny and Kishan were snooping and looking at it. I think he just needed to take the shortest one to guarantee that he was safe. Other than that, Rome was pissing people off, being a clear, just too much presence around camp, where pretty much everybody, everyone but Genevieve, would have wanted him out if it weren't for the fact that he found that idol. That leads to him just clearly being safe, and then Asia goes home, but Rome was pretty much going to be a goner, I think, even despite that he was probably one of the better challenge players there, even though sometimes he messed up, but he seems like he would do well in challenges because he's a more physical guy. But Rome is able to get through the pre-merge, and it is good that he got through the Kishan boot round, but his game just crumbles by the time he gets to the merge. He has no real loyal allies, because even Genevieve is willing to lose him, and gets blindsided. He thought that he was staying there, and I think Rome just is not a good player, and he thinks he is. So I have him here at 17. And at number 16, I have the first boot, John. John is someone that I actually debated having a spot higher than this, but when you're just assessing the game on this season, and I think even if you were assessing him as a player overall, you can't really justify having him much higher because he didn't do much. But I think that John, I don't think that there was much more that he could have done at the same time. He was just kind of on a tribe where he was the oldest guy, and he didn't have anybody to really bond with that well, although he definitely could have tried and make better social connections, and I think that's probably the worst thing about his game, is just the fact that he doesn't. And but he didn't do too much wrong. Andy does much more wrong in that round, but is kept around as kind of this shield that's a little bit better in challenges and can be taken out next easily. And obviously that's not what ends up happening with Andy, but John is just kind of taken out of the game, and I think he could have potential on a tribe that fit more with him, but he still didn't do very much in the game. So I have him at 16 as the first boot. Then at number 15, I do have Asia. I think Asia could have played a really good game on this season. Being a Survivor podcaster, I was really excited to see her on this season. But I think that the game she plays ends up being pretty lackluster, sadly. And she does have fault in her boot round. And that's why I actually debated her and John. But I ended up putting Asia higher because she was probably screwed over by the fact that Rome had an idol. I think there's a very good chance that Rome isn't in the majority if people don't know that he's safe. And Asia did have allies. She had Teeny and Keyshawn, but they ended up being more loyal to Genevieve, and the vote got flipped on her. She was stubborn and wanted to keep Saul in, which I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, it's always good to try to get your interest to happen, but I think that she needed to downplay that a little bit and at least try to be like, okay, yeah, I might go with this, and then be like, guys, actually, what if we did this? I think just a bit too outwardly stubborn about it, and it led them to flip on her. But I mean, early on, it looked like she could have been in a decent spot, but that majority and just with Rome ended up being what the majority was on the tribe because Rome had that idol. And I think there's a world where Asia does well, but I don't think it happened on this season, and I really can't have her any higher. And then next up at number 14 is Annika. Annika played a game that started off pretty well, obviously in the majority, and she created relationships with Rachel and Sierra. She did piss Sam off a bit. I mean, I think they really just kind of had a little bit of a feud, so it's not really too much against her, but they get out John that first round, and then Andy is set up as this next big target. But what ends up happening over the next couple of episodes is Andy weasels his way in, Sam picks him up as a number, Sierra's with Sam, and they end up becoming a trio, and Annika has no idea. Annika thinks that she's been in the majority this entire 5-episode run on her tribe until things flip against her. But it really flipped by around episode 3 or maybe 4. And in episode 5, they lose and she gets blindsided hard. And I think that while she started off okay, the game flipped on her and she had no idea. So she's here at 14. Then at number 13, I have Keyshawn, the last pre-merge boot in the game, second to last pre-juror left in the ranking. And Keyshawn, for being the 4th boot, definitely had a solid game. Keyshawn started out with Teeny as a close ally, Genevieve, Asia kind of, but he ended up flipping on her. And up until his boot round, he's looking like he's doing pretty good. But I think that the Asia move, in hindsight, was a little bit of a misstep because they could have just still taken out Saul there. And then this gives Genevieve more of the ability in the next round to flip the game on Keyshawn. After he throws out her name as a decoy, she just, I guess, has this vision of Keyshawn is this big threat that needs to get out. And I feel like Genevieve kind of saw him as what she not wanted to be, but I think the way that Keyshawn just threw out Rome's name reminds me of the way that Genevieve would just throw out names, but Keyshawn was not able to get away with it. Genevieve was able to get away with putting these names out and the people end up going, but Genevieve saw Keyshawn do this and clocked him immediately. And I think it is pretty unlucky that he ended up on a tribe with Genevieve because the rest of these people wanted Rome out, but Genevieve wasn't quite up to going with that and saw the opportunity to get rid of Keyshawn, but it was a lot because he was a threat. And so I think for a 4th boot, he has a pretty good game, so he's here at 13. And number 12 is Tiana, the last pre-juror left in the ranking. And Tiana had a game that I think is actually pretty close to Keyshawn in this ranking, but she does get further, and that's actually the main reason that she's higher. But she starts off in a good position on Tuku, kind of the swing vote, in this TK vote, even though she can only make it tie if she flips the other way. But after that, she's kind of strung along, thinking she's in good with Sue and Caroline, when really she's on the bottom with Kyle, and probably is the one to go if they lose again, which is not good. And she does end up going home in this scenario that's basically just her tribe in the pre-merge, but it's after the merge. So it's like, why would she be higher than Keyshawn if her game was not as good? But I think in the pre-merge, but I think the reason that I would have her here is because she does get to the merge and she is doing pretty well when she gets to the merge. She's being social and, talking to people like pretty much everybody is, but I think that the fact that she gets to the merge and passes the pre-merge, it definitely shows that she's a little bit screwed over. I always kind of thought she wasn't that screwed over because that's literally her tribe that she had been on the entire game. But at the same time, she did make it past the pre-merge and is thrown back into that pre-merge scenario when she potentially had some longevity for the game. She was making these relationships in the merge. So I think that despite kind of a lackluster pre-merge, I would still have her at 12. At number 11, I have Saul. Saul, he had a rough start on Lavo. I think that his merge game was pretty good up until he went home, but he almost went home at the Asia round. I think that would have been what Keyshawn and Teeny should have done, but things just flipped mostly because of Asia being too stubborn on wanting to keep him, and she ends up going home. But things get a little bit better as the Keyshawn round happens, even though that's kind of an iffy round where he doesn't even want to work with Rome. That was never going to last, but they do vote together in this round and take out a threat in Keyshawn. And he gets to the merge and he's doing well, building connections, saves Rachel, and then Genevieve just totally flips on him and all of the votes flip against him. And I think that while that is kind of a crazy scenario, and he was not on my radar to be voted out that round. I did not think Saul was going home, but eventually Genevieve does flip the votes on him and he goes, and I think that's a negative that his own ally that he wanted to take to the end ended up feeling the need to get him out that early into the merge. But I do think Saul has some good chops for the game, but I can't really have him much higher than number 11. And then at 10, I have Kyle, who is this likable challenge beast figure, kind of would be a casual favorite, but I did really like him myself. And I think that his game is maybe the slightest bit underrated in the fact that I think that he comes off, especially early on, as this person that does not really have a strategic mind. But I do think that he was learning the game. I do think that Kyle was getting better as the game went on. In the pre-merge, though, he was left out of that first vote, and he's never really in a great spot in the pre-merge. And the merge gets here, he's winning a lot of challenges, but he does survive the Saul round while he's already considered a threat. And that's really part of why he's above Saul. I already was pretty sure he was going to be above Saul, but I do think it is kind of close. But I think that Kyle definitely plays better as the game goes on because we get to the merge and he's quick to throw out Rome's name and lead the charge on that. And that was good for him because Rome was going crazy and making up stuff about Kyle and spreading stuff about Kyle. And then he is also part of taking Gabe out, which really is what told me that Kyle was there to play, even though he just kind of has this like good guy vibe. He's not making a lot of the big strategic moves, but he was ready to flip on Gabe, someone that had been on his tribe and you would think that he was going to be loyal to. But he votes out Gabe and is cool with that, but then he loses immunity and he's just taken out for having too much of a perception of being a threat, mainly for being likable and winning challenges, not really for being strategic. So I have him at 10. He's still lower than his boot, but I do think that he wasn't just completely aloof. I think that he, by the end of his game, had some decent play. And then at number 9, I have Sierra, who I think played flat out a better game than Saul and Kyle despite being voted out earlier. And a lot of the reason for that is the pre-merge. I think that the pre-merge gets too overlooked when analyzing a season, when that is, that's almost half the season. I guess on this season it's close to a third, but between there, that is a good portion of the game of the season. And Sierra was on top of the pre-merge while those two were not at all. And I think that the move to keep Andy benefits Sam more than her, but I don't think it's entirely bad for her. I think if Sam and her manage Andy better in the merge, it would have been pretty good for her. I mean, Annika and Rachel were closer to each other than Sierra was to either of them. So to side with what Sam wanted to do and keep Andy, who she was bonding with, I think definitely makes a lot of sense. And she betrayed Annika, but had a really good pre-merge. And sadly is quickly seen as a threat with Sam when the merge starts. I mean, the Rome vote goes well for her, and Tiana around, she's doing fine, being social, whatever. I mean, she doesn't go to tribal. But then Andy finds out that Sam and Sierra were okay with splitting the vote on him at the Rome vote, and things crumble. Andy's ready to flip, and almost everyone flips against Sam and Sierra. And I think that Sierra is taken out mostly because Sam was a shield and Sierra was more of a sneaky threat that could get by later on in the game, which funnily enough is what ends up happening with Sam. But Sierra was seen as the better person to take out, and I think partially for being a threat. So it was a pretty good game that lands her at number 9. And then at number 8 is Teeny. Despite Teeny making it a lot further than anyone we've talked about so far, I don't think I can really have Teeny much higher because there are some pros, but Teeny's game was pretty rough. But starting with the pros, Teeny was a pretty damn good social player despite a blemish that they had with Sam. And I mean, not being perfect, I feel like Teeny was pretty well liked. And there was a point where it seemed like maybe the game could turn around for Teeny and a winner edit could start because we were shown how liked Teeny was. But it just never picked up. Teeny's game never really picked up. They were on top there for the Kyle and Gabe votes and Sierra vote in the majority. But other than that, I mean, so much was going on around Teeny that Teeny did not know what was happening. You have the Saul round, whereas Teeny finds out but did not want to do that. Teeny having to go against one of their main allies, Asia. Didn't even vote for Asia, but the plan was for Asia to go. That wasn't good for Teeny because Sean gets completely blindsided. Teeny has no idea what's going on. And Operation Italy happens and Teeny is left out of the vote. But to give them credit, I do think it was good that they pivoted after that and worked with the 3 that did Operation Italy to try to go for Rachel. And it's a rocky game, but there are points where they are in the majority, but I don't really think this game ever had much win equity, sadly, because it was just very much an all over the place game. And I think there's a world where Teeny gets some votes, but I do think that having them here at number 8 is pretty accurate. Then next, at number 7, I have Gabe. And Gabe played a good game and was just taken out eventually for being too big of a threat. I don't really know how he gets much further, but the game while he was in was good. His pre-merge was really good, despite like what was looking like a rocky start with him looking for the idol and everything, him going off from people from camp. He actually ends up in one of the best spots in the tribe, working with Sue and Caroline, and doing really well there, and being a big part of getting TK out. And then he's in the numbers for the whole pre-merge, and when his tribe goes back to tribal, kind of when Tiana goes home, he's in the numbers there. He wanted her out. And Gabe is in the majority for the next few rounds with Sierra going home and Saul going home, but he gets taken out after this for just being a bit too much of a threat. And while Sue was loyal to him, Caroline recognized that she needed to set herself apart from that trio, and she even voted for him. So his boot was not close, despite being him or Genevieve, who was also a big threat. And like I said, I don't know how he gets too much further, but he did have a good threatening game. So I have him here at 7. At number 6, I have Sue, the first finalist that we're going to be talking about. And Sue's game is a little bit complicated and kind of double-sided in my view, because on one hand, she had one of the smoothest paths in the game and made it to the end. But on the other hand, she didn't really do like a lot to actually like make moves and get herself there, and she ends the game with no win equity. And I just think that she didn't do enough to warrant jury votes, and she probably gets to the end in most like scenarios in this season, but where are her votes? I mean, her close allies didn't vote for her because they didn't feel like her game was good enough to warrant that vote. But I do think she played a decent, like, loyal game, having these strong allies that were not going to betray her. These loyal allies, Caroline, Gabe, and then towards the end, Rachel. Although I do think that she was a bit too loyal to Rachel, as Rachel was just the clear biggest threat, and Sue was okay with letting her get to the end. But at that point, Sue didn't really have too much of a way to win anyways. But, I mean, Sue is in a good spot in Tuku. Somewhat running that tribe, I would say, alongside Caroline and Gabe. They kind of run it as a trio. But then we get to the merge, and I feel like her game just kind of fades into the background. I mean, she's able to go along with a lot of these votes, but she is left out when Gabe goes home, and she has this, like, vindictive rivalry with Kyle, even though he doesn't have a problem with her, and it takes her a little while to finally get him out, but he does go at the final 8. During the Saul round, her name does go around a bit, but other than that, she does pretty much skate by the game without her name coming up much at all. Operation Italy flips against her, and she would have definitely been in the majority after that if it weren't for Rachel having idols and whatever, immunities. But she does get to the end with not much danger, but just where was she actually going to win the game? And I don't think she would have deserved to win the game. When I'm doing this ranking, win equity is a big factor, but not the deciding factor. I think that if someone played a really, really good game and is a bit underrated by the jury, they can still be high on the list, and not necessarily in like a Russell Hantz type way, just in a way of the jury liked them, but they weren't the number one contender for the jury. But I don't think that Sue really was underrated. I think the jury got it right with Sue. So I have her here at number 6. And then at number 5, we have what might be a controversial take. We have the winner of the season, Rachel. And I have seen a lot of discourse about Rachel's game, and I've always kind of had my opinion, at least as the season was almost ending. But I know that a lot of people and a lot of you watching are going to disagree with this, but I know that there are people out there that do think this way, and then there's people kind of in the middle. And I mean, I've seen people rank Rachel lower than this, so it's not like I'm the number one detester of Rachel's game, but I definitely lean on the side of that her winning game is not very strong, and that there are other stronger games on this season. But I think that Rachel is a good player. I think Rachel has a clear mind for the game and a clear social game that is really good. But the game that Rachel actually plays here, I don't think is that great, and I don't think it's better than the other 4. I would say it's good. I would say it's good because she wins and she gets far, and she is one of the better games on the season. But I don't think that I can say it's that great. And the reasoning for this is you run through Rachel's game. Her pre-merge is not very good. Sure, she starts out in the majority, and when Annika goes, she's not the target, but she was on the bottom there, and she didn't know it for episodes 3 and 4 and 5 until Annika gets blindsided. So her pre-merge is not that much better than Annika's, who gets voted out right there. She was the only person left out of that vote. And we get to the merge, and things get a bit better for her. She's making good social connections and pretty much is loved by everyone. And I think that this could have been really good, but I think everybody just kind of clocks Rachel as a threat before too much longer in the game. And she is able to skate by these early merge votes and do well. Her name is out there at Final 11, and she gets blindsided, but she does have a really good and innovative play with the shot in the dark, having an idol, but I think the best part about that is that no one would know that you had an idol when you play a shot in the dark. And also, she gauged the reactions of the other people. I think that's the main reason she said she did it. And that was a really good move. Now, the round for her as a whole was not very good because she was still working with Sam and Sierra and gets blindsided along with Sam and Sierra, where Sierra goes home. But next round, final 10 with Saul. I think this is pretty messy for her, where she tells Sam about this plan and he almost blows the whole thing up. But then I think Rachel's strongest stretch of game is after this, where Gabe goes home and then Kyle goes home, and she's in this underdogs alliance. And even though they really weren't underdogs, I don't think, but at least at this point in the game, but things were going really well there. And it seemed like she was maybe starting to fade into the background a little bit in terms of people wanting to take her out. But after that is when things turn around. And also, I will say, she was shown to want Genevieve out during both the Gabe and Kyle rounds, and I think that that's bad that she didn't get her way. I do think that might be somewhat out of context, potentially to hype up this rivalry between Rachel and Genevieve that ends up getting, more pivotal towards the end of the season. But I definitely think there's some merit to that she wanted Genevieve to go, but it didn't happen either of those rounds. But still, she was on top. She was in this alliance, and she was probably the most dominant player in that alliance. And if that alliance had become the final five, she was set up really well to win if she could just get past the final five. And she did have the idol. But final seven, things come crashing down with Operation Italy. I think that she was a bit cocky after winning the immunity challenge, where she could have blocked someone's vote and prevented this move from happening, but she was safe, so she wanted to save it, and I think that maybe she should have used it, but even then, that's an advantage, and I don't think that needing an advantage is a good part of your game, and that really is a lot of why Rachel is this low. But the wool is pulled over Rachel's eyes in this Operation Italy round, and I think that she would have gone home if she had not won immunity, if she did not have a block vote. I think she probably goes home with the idol in her pocket, but I do think that she would use the block vote if she wasn't safe. But still, she needed an advantage there to stay because Andy, Sam, and Genevieve pulled this move off very impressively, and she did not see it coming. And then at final six, now Rachel is in this spot in the clear minority, and once again would have been taken out if she wasn't safe with this idol. I do think that she plays this idol well this round. Big flashy move for the jury, getting out Andy. But she needed safety. She was screwed there if she hadn't had this safety. And then the same thing happens the next round, where if Rachel wasn't safe, she would have been going home. And I just don't think this is that highly ranked of a winning game because of this. Andy's comparison to Ben and Mike Holloway at Final Tribal did make sense. And so I don't think that I can really put Rachel above the top four for these reasons. Now, I do think there are good aspects to her game. The points that she was on top in this innovative move with the shot in the dark. She's a clear innovative player, thinking of that and putting the rice in her pocket. It's not a game move, but I think that shows innovation. And she is just this clear social threat that everybody liked. That is, I think, why she wins in the end. I think that, at least from what we're shown, her final tribal council was much worse than Sam's, but I don't think this jury was gonna change, and that is impressive. It is impressive that this jury liked her that much, where their opinion was just cemented in that Rachel was the best player of the season. But I don't think that she was. I think that from the game played on this given season, Rachel's game was not all that. I think Rachel could play an amazing game if she came back. I think she did not expect to play this game. I don't fault her at all for playing this game, but when I'm ranking the games on this season, Rachel is not necessarily that high. So while it's a complicated placement, and I debated this, I definitely debated putting her a spot or two higher. I think that this is where she lands for me, and she wouldn't be super high in a winner ranking. But I would be happy to see her come back at some point. I did like her on the season, and I think she could do really well. At least if she doesn't have a super high threat level on that season, which I think people are going to see her as a big threat coming in after this win, because it feels like she's looked at really highly by like the casual audience right now. But despite her winning and being looked at that way, I do have to have her here at 5. I think that despite her win equity, which is probably the best aspect of her game because she just outright wins against almost anybody, it seems like. I think that that's due to an impressive social game, but I think other people above her had decent enough social games and much better strategic games. So that's why I have her where I have her. And then next at number 4 is someone that I did almost have below Rachel, but I ended up going with Caroline here above Rachel at 4. And this was close for me, but I did kind of realize how good Caroline's game was, and I think part of that is postseason stuff with the jury saying that she would have been a threat in the end, and other people kind of talking about how, Caroline had a really good game on this season, and I do have to agree. I don't think that she beats my top 3, but Caroline's game was really smooth. She had a good spot on Tuku. The entire pre-merge was probably the safest person there, as Sue was a target at a point and Gabe was kind of put himself out there as a threat, and I think that there could have been a move potentially made against one of them, but Caroline was chilling. Caroline, she had a loyal ally in Sue and another loyal ally in Gabe, even though Sue was definitely her number 1 and she was Sue's number 1, and skated through the pre-merge, easily in a good spot. And then get to the merge, and she's also in the majority for her entire run until she gets sniped out of the game. You have the Tiana boot where Rachel saves herself, and then they have to pivot and get Tiana out, who Caroline did have a decent connection with, but she let her go there, which I don't think was the wrong move at that tribal at all. It was her or Gabe or Sue. And then game gets flipped against Sierra, and the Sol move happens, which she didn't have her vote and wasn't like pivotal there or anything. But she's surviving, and nobody's really thinking about taking out Caroline, despite her being in the majority the whole game. And then the Gabe round happens, and I do give her actually a lot of credit at the game round, despite not like being the one to start it. I really like how she recognized the opportunity to go with this move and vote for Gabe and have that on her resume that she turned on him, and Sue didn't, which is the person that she wanted to take to the end and sit next to. And I think that's a smart move at this point in the game where you're starting to get a little bit further in the game, playing a little bit for Final Tribal and thinking of who you want to be sitting next to if you are there, and playing against those people and making more moves than those people. So I think that was kind of an innovative move, actually, for the reasons that she made it and how she left Sue out of it. And then she gets Sue right back on her side next round. They get rid of Kyle. But then at Final 7, the wool gets pulled over her eyes along with her allies, and she is sniped out of the game. And I think people recognize that she was a pretty big threat, but part of it was that they couldn't get Rachel. But that's actually good for her, that she had a target ahead of her. And, Caroline gets sniped out. I think she maybe could have done a little more, tried to get Sue to play the idol for her, but at the same time, I don't think she wanted to strong-arm Sue into that because she did think that she was safe. And she got outplayed by the 3 of Operation Italy. And funnily enough, that's the top 3 of the list. But overall, I think that it's definitely a good game that she played. Now, I don't know if she's one of the top threats at the end. I don't know if she can beat someone like a Rachel or a Genevieve, but overall, good game from Caroline. And then next at number 3, I do have Andy. And Andy played kind of a roller coaster of a game, but one that just starts off terrible and ends up riding the high for most of the rest of the season. And it was definitely impressive how Andy was able to get himself up into the game again after his terrible start. And I think there's definitely an argument for him being higher. I also think there's an argument for him being swapped with Caroline. But I have him here at 3, and I think the reason that I don't have him higher is a lot because of his pre-merge. And like I said earlier, I think the pre-merge gets overlooked too much by a lot of people doing rankings like this, or just people thinking about Survivor in general. The juries don't really care about pre-merge that much, but I do think it matters a lot. It's how you start the game, and Andy's start was really bad. I mean, his first round is just very bad on a game level. I feel bad for him having the panic attack. Clearly, he was just panicking, but throwing John under the bus at the mat after the tribe, that was rough. And it's kind of crazy that he didn't get taken out, but I think his tribe just saw him as an opportunity for someone to be taken out next. And he is able to get himself out of that spot, and I do think that's really impressive. Now, I think part of that is Sam and mostly Sam, but somewhat Sierra too, just kind of wanting to pick him up and realize the opportunity. But I definitely think he did good social work with them to get into that position. But he is a bit lucky that his tribe doesn't go right back to tribal. I think by episode 3, he's probably safe, but it's debatable. And then definitely by episode 4. But from there, he does get to the merge and starts off doing pretty well, and then turns on Sam and Sierra and really is the main driver of this vote against Sierra. And it was a big move for him. It definitely put him on people's radars as someone that can be taken seriously, and I think that was good for him. Now, I do think that Sam and Sierra, despite putting his name out there at the room vote, were pretty loyal to him, but I understand the move, and I don't think it was a bad move for him. And going forward, Andy is in the majority, and he ends up in this alliance of quote-unquote underdogs that are running that mid-merge portion of the game. And then once, he's like, shit, I'm not being taken seriously enough, and I want to make a move for my resume, he pulls off Operation Italy. Now, I don't say that as in he was the only one. Sam actually did think of it too, but Andy brought it up, and then they all pulled it off together. But that was a very impressive move and took out an under-recognized threat in Caroline, and I think it sets him up better to win, as he wasn't on the top of that Underdogs Alliance, and he definitely gives him more of a pitch if he makes it to the end. Now, Rachel takes him out, and that move where he was telling her all about his game, that was not good, and that was a blunder. I think that Andy has kind of a series of blunders throughout the game, including that and including episode 1, and that being the most of it. But I don't think that those should be overlooked because he's definitely a player that is prone to mistakes, and I don't know how he does in the final 3. Now, I think I heard that he had some equity, but I don't know if that jury would necessarily be down to hear him out enough that he needs, because I think he could talk pretty well, but I mean, they didn't really hear Sam out that much, even though he had the better final tribal council, in my opinion. So I think that if something was to put Andy above my number 1 and number 2, it would be win equity, even though, like I said, I don't think that's necessarily the full determining factor. But if I believed 100%, okay, Andy gets to the end and he wins, I think he would be higher. But I don't know if I necessarily believe that. And he gets taken out of the game at 6 a lot due to his own mistakes. Now, Sue was supposedly like a big part of that and was really mad at him for flipping the last round, but that is still his own doing. I think it was the right move. I think it was a really good move, flipping at 7, but it is part his own doing, getting voted out. Now, he wouldn't have gone if Rachel didn't have an idol, and so he would have been in the majority. But I think that while playing a really good game, there are some flaws, so I do have him here at number 3. And then at number 2, I have the 5th placer, Genevieve. And Genevieve was someone I debated putting lower a little bit, but I landed her here because I feel like Genevieve's game was very strong and powerful, and she was clearly one of the best people in this season at actually being able to make moves and pull them off. Now, there are questions as to were all of those moves the right moves, but I still land her here. You start with Genevieve's game in the pre-merge, and despite the show not really showing her until episode 4, she was the clear star player of Lavo that whole pre-merge, in my opinion. We know that she was really close with Keyshawn and Teeny. Early on, they were a trio, but then and she was able to get Asia out, what she wanted to happen there. I think that only really benefits her and Rome, but Rome would have gone home without his idol. So I think she's the best player that round. And then the Keyshawn round, she is pretty much in good with everyone and realizes that Keyshawn is going to be a threat and is very close with Teeny, and those two are tighter than they are to her. So she gets Keyshawn out, and this is really when the show starts to show us how good of a player Genevieve is. She just ran that tribe, and I think that was really impressive. Now at Merge, she's willing to let Rome go, which is fine. I don't think that round is the best for her, but it's not too bad. And she's in the majority in these early Merge rounds. And then we get to the Saul round, which I think is impressive from her, but maybe not the right move strategically, because Saul was willing to take her to the end. And she just kind of started to see him as an unreliable ally, I guess, and the fact that he had wanted Rome out and whatever. But I do think how she is able to just pull this off so easily is impressive and wrangle all of these numbers. And eventually the entire tribe ends up voting for Saul. Now, it is a little bit messy with Sam finding out and almost flipping it on Sue. But overall, I do think that's an impressive round from her as a player. But for her game on this season, it is definitely debatable, because then it puts her in this bad spot where she is a big threat and target now. However, the reason that I don't knock it for her more is because she survives those upcoming rounds and gets to a point where she is back in the majority. I think if Genevieve goes home where Gabe goes or where Kyle goes, I'm looking at this move as a lot worse than the Genevieve that made it past those rounds and had Operation Italy happen and got back in to the majority, and actually would have been in the Final Four had Rachel not won immunity, with a real shot to win. So despite this move setting her up as this big threat, she is able to skate by those next couple rounds. Now, it is close, and it's a lot more just who people end up wanting to take out, but she had people pushing for her to go, and she was still able to survive. Now, those people pushing, that's not a good thing, but the fact that she survives these rounds really was impressive, and that was probably one of the Gabe Kyle rounds weren't the most exciting, but I think that they were fun in how nail-biting they were for Genevieve, because both of those rounds I genuinely thought there was a good shot that Genevieve was going home. And she's able to get past them, be a big part of this Operation Italy move, which was very impressive. Now, I'd probably credit her the least because Sam had already thought of the plan that morning, and Andy is the one to come up with it. But still, she gets a lot of credit for this move because it was very difficult to pull off and gets her back in the majority where Rachel would have gone next round had she not had that idol. And then Final Five, I do think, is rough for her either way, with Rachel in or Rachel not in. But in the scenario that actually happened, if Rachel doesn't win that immunity, Genevieve is in the Final Four, like I said. But if Rachel goes out at 6, Genevieve does have a bit of a rough spot at Final Five. I don't know if she can survive without immunity there. But there was a path to the end for Genevieve. The fact that she got through being on the bottom, she had a path to the end with some of the most winning chances of anyone in the game. So I do think that is a really impressive game. She exhibited really good play and good enough social play. I mean, she did kind of downplay her social game because she didn't want to hurt people, but it seemed like she came around on that by the end of the game. So despite some flaws, especially with that Saul move, I do think that Genevieve has a really solid game. So I have her here at number 2. And then at number 1, my number 1 player of the season is Sam, the runner-up of the season. And it wasn't really super close for me, but I think that's because how invested I was in him in the finale, and I was hoping that jury would give him a little bit more of a chance than they did after his final tribal council, and I was just pretty hell-bent on the fact that I would have voted for Sam, and I definitely still feel that way. And it just caused me to think about his game overall more that night, and I just thought that he deserved to win. And was thinking of how good and actually really interesting his game trajectory was, at least to me, because I feel like a big threat kind of guy like him, like, outwardly threatening looking, physical, likable, was immediately kind of seen as a threat once the merge happened. The fact that Sam was able to manage his threat level and get back into a spot where he wasn't one of the top threats and make it to the end as the actual underdog against the person who ends up winning was very interesting, and I feel like something that we haven't seen a lot of from players in his archetype. I mean, if he had won, I saw like Gabler comparisons, but that is only accurate because he would have been a pretty surprising winner to people because everybody just thought Rachel was going to win, and obviously she did. But I could kind of see Aris, but I don't really think he has that much similarity to Aris. I mean, I think Sam was more strategic and a more charismatic like guy and figure in the season. But anyway, actually running through his game in terms of his gameplay and the reason that I have him at number 1. Like I said before, I think that pre-merge gets underrated in these rankings, and Sam's pre-merge was very impressive. I think that there's kind of a trend here. I think Sam and Genevieve have somewhat similar trajectories in the game, and that starts off with their dominant pre-merge. While Genevieve was the clear star of Lavo, Sam was the clear star of Gata. Sam starts off obviously in the majority and get rid of John, but then he positions himself in the middle, working with a very close ally in Sierra. They were number 1's strongest duo maybe in the game at that point, and eventually he realizes, why don't I work with Andy? Why don't I use this number that's there and pull him in against this women's alliance, which he was on the bottom of? I mean, if Andy goes next, it's 2v2, and would Sierra go to rocks for him? Who knows? So Sam definitely made the optimal play on this tribe in pulling in Andy, and it leads to the Annika blindside, someone that he didn't really get along with, taking her out like he wanted to. I mean, it was decent for Sierra too, but I think that this move definitely benefits Sam the most, and obviously Andy, who's staying, but it comes down to what Sam and Sierra want to do. Do they want to save Andy? And they save him here, and he gets to the merge. Now, going into the merge, I think him and Sierra have a bit of a target because people thought of them as a power couple and thought they were dating or whatever. And I don't think that's fully his fault, but obviously you have to give him some fault for being seen as a threat. I mean, I think he's just an outwardly threatening guy, like I said. And then the Rome vote goes well. He is part of the majority, but pretty much everyone is. But he does probably have one of the bigger mistakes in his game in throwing Andy's name as a split vote without really thinking of what that could do. And then this leads us to when Sierra and him are blindsided and Andy flips on them at the final 11. And I think it would have been hard for Sam to make it much further with Sierra in the game because of the perception of their threat level, but still not a good spot for him to be in, being blindsided. So that's not a good round for Sam. But he is able to stay over Sierra, which I do think is pretty impressive. I think people liked Sam and wanted to keep him in and use him as a shield versus Sierra. And so moving forward, Sam plays this scrappy underdog game, but I do find it impressive, and I find it more impressive than Genevieve's time being on the bottom, where now Sam was on the bottom one more round. He's pretty much on the bottom during this Saul round, but I think that Genevieve, she was much more of a target, and Sam is easily able to just kind of sink into the background and sink into the bottom of the tribe where people aren't looking at him as their top threat. And he is informed on the Saul vote, at least, and that's because of his connection with Rachel, and tries to stir things up. It doesn't quite work out, but it doesn't come back to bite him. I think that this could have, but I think the fact that he comes out pretty much fine from it is a good thing for him. And then the next 2 rounds, he's this underdog that's clinging kind of onto the majority and able to find out what's happening. And I think the way that he plays these rounds are interesting, where his name isn't coming up the most. His name isn't the one that's getting the votes. It's Genevieve. And he's able to just kind of skate by and lower the perception of his threat level and then get to the final 7 where it's looking a little bit rough. And then he actually came up with the plan to pull in Andy or Teeny at the beginning of that day, and then he wins the reward and he decides on Andy, which was the right call. Now Andy's the one to say the plan, so obviously that's some credit to Andy, but Sam had almost just as much of a role in that as Andy, if not the same, because he did actually pick Andy to go in the reward, initiating the plan to start, and he plays this round really well. I mean, just great acting job. They all do so well in this move, and they pull off a very difficult move. There were a lot of things going against them, and they're able to take out this minor threat. Well, not even minor threat, but just underrated threat in Caroline, and probably have a good shot to get Rachel out if she doesn't win immunity and if she doesn't have the block vote. And so now Sam is back in the majority in a great spot, and if Rachel didn't have this idol, she goes out at 6. There's Genevieve as a clear next big threat there. And then there's Andy, who has started to make these big moves, and I think Sam has a good argument of why Andy should go before him if he needs to pull out that argument. And I do think that Sam has a good chance to beat Andy in the end. I think that Sam had a better perception in the jury for most of the game than Andy. And I think Andy's jury prospects were an uphill battle. And obviously in the final 3 that we got against Rachel, Sam does not win. But I think he had an amazing final tribal council. I just think the jury was set on Rachel. They liked her so much. And that obviously is a positive for Rachel's game. But I've gone over Rachel's game. And I think that Sam had scenarios where he wins. I think he easily beats Teeny and Sue. And I think with Andy in the final 3, he has a good shot. But I think he knew he needed to get to the final 3 with Teeny and Sue. I think that's what he was aiming for. And he could have made it happen if Rachel didn't just win out. And also, the fact that he does get there and he has such a good case, it just tells me that against people that weren't as extremely liked by the jury, Sam does have a good shot to win. And I think that if you're putting Sam lower, I think the biggest argument is probably win equity, but I do think that Sam had a good bit of win equity and could have definitely won this season. And in the season where he didn't win, I still think that he played the best game. I would have voted for Sam. So that's my take. Sam is my number 1. And that's the video. That's my ranking of all the games played on Survivor 47. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What did you agree with, disagree with? How would you rank these players? It's been really interesting seeing the discourse in the community. So I'm very curious to see other people's opinions that watch my channel. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was a bit long, but I wanted to give all my takes on these players. And yeah, I'd like to make more videos like this going forward sometimes. So let me know if you want to see that or if you have any suggestions. And if you actually made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And hope everyone enjoyed the season and have a great New Year's.